Well, Cynata is the leading company worldwide in the development of cell therapies based around iPSCs. And as I mentioned before, because these cells can give rise to any tissue in the body, we now see many other biotech and pharma companies utilizing those properties to produce their cell of interest, whether that's, in our case, an MSC, or in the case of Parkinson's disease, for example, dopaminergic neurons that other companies are pursuing, and many other applications. But as the leading company in the world, obviously generating that clinical data was terribly important to establish both safety and then ultimately efficacy of, in our case, MSCs derived from iPSCs. It's a very new modality, and therefore we were breaking very new ground in that clinical trial. CYP-001 is the first product that we developed, and that was very successfully studied in a clinical trial in acute steroid-resistant graft-versus-host disease, or GvHD. GvHD arises in patients who typically have had a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, or bone marrow transplant, as it's often known. And unfortunately, in a significant proportion of these patients, they have a reaction which leads to the graft, that is the donor bone marrow, reacting against the recipient, hence the name graft-versus-host disease. And in those patients, there really is only one a primary course of treatment, and that's corticosteroids. And if the patient fails steroids, then there's very few other options available to them. Hence, the mortality rate in these patients is up to around 80 to 90% after 2 years. So a significant unmet medical need, even though fortunately it's a relatively rare condition. In fact, Cynata has orphan drug designation in the United States for CYP-001. And so we conducted that clinical study as a first-time iPSC-derived cell therapy clinical trial, and it was highly successful, with more than half of the patients having a complete response to the treatment, and nearly all of the patients showing at least a partial response. And that effect was very durable, in that when we followed the patients out for 2 years, we saw a very good outcome, and 60% of the patients are still alive, compared to less than 20%, which is standard of care. So this was an outstanding outcome, not only for those patients, their families and their carers, but of course also Cynata and the field of iPSC-derived cell therapies.